It's 7:05. We're going to let some people come in. And I've already turned on the record button, so that's good. And here's a song for our friend Doug, just to keep you occupied as we get started here. Daddy, 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 hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more with the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more. What you say? Hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more with the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more. Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more with the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more. What you say? Hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more with the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more. No more, no more, no more, no more. No more, no more, no more, no more. No more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more, no more, no more. Go! Well, welcome everyone to our 10th webinar. I'm going to just give you a little bit of information. Those of you who are unfamiliar with Zoom, although I suspect that many of you have been at our webinars before. If you have questions as we're going along, please recognize you've been muted as you come in. Please use the chat box to communicate. It's helpful if people can remain muted throughout the webinar, and we will open things up for discussion a little bit later. If you do want to actually speak out when we get to the discussion part, if you click on the reactions button, you can see on the screen there on the far right, this should be located at the bottom of your screen. The reactions button, if you click on that, you'll see an opportunity to raise your hand, and that way whoever's moderating the question and answer can most easily see who's next in line with their questions. So I'm going to turn it over now to our host for tonight, Mr. Don McLean, most of you or all of you will already know Don, and I'll pass it over to Don to take it away.
Thanks very much, Jim. This is, as we may have already noted, the 10th edition of our Conservation Matters webinar. You can see from the agenda slide that we have a full webinar tonight, but we think it can be accomplished in about an hour, and then we'll follow up with questions from you. So as we've explained before, our Hamilton 350 Committee subgroup is paying particular attention to what is happening to conservation authorities, and maybe there's a good slide of that. There are 36 of these independent watershed management organizations covering all of Southern Ontario, as well as several in the north that aren't shown on this map. They're organized on a watershed basis, and they include representatives on their boards from all the municipalities that fall within those watershed boundaries. So in Hamilton, we have 4 conservation authorities with jurisdictions in some parts of the city. These are the Hamilton Conservation Authority, mainly in the west end of the city, the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority covering most of the East Mountain and Glanbrook area, Conservation Halton on the north side, and the Grand River Conservation Authority on the south. These CAs and others were established to minimize erosion and flooding and to keep our streams, wetlands, and other natural areas healthy and protected. The particular thing which drove this process was Hurricane Hazel in 1954 and the disastrous effects of that hurricane. So as I mentioned, this is our 10th webinar and the first anniversary of this series. We started a year ago, March 2021, and our climate group started just before that, a focus on conservation authorities after the provincial Ford government rewrote the conservation authority legislation to take away some of their authority from the conservation authorities and pass it over to the provincial cabinet, apparently in hopes of making things easier for the land developers. A lot of people were opposed to that. 45,000 people emailed the province to oppose it. All 36 conservation authorities passed resolutions against it, as did over 40 municipal councils. But most of the changes that Ford proposed went ahead, and we have watched as they have unfolded over the last year and a bit. We took this up as our task to try and figure out what exactly this would mean. And the methodology we adopted was to start monitoring Conservation Authority board meetings, which are now at this point available through Zoom, online meetings. And we've had volunteers covering already 5 different Conservation Authority boards, including the 4 in Hamilton that I mentioned. And we are looking for always more people to help us because we would like to expand this even beyond those 5 conservation authorities. So CA Watch has been detailing the changes like threats to programs and services that have been rolled out gradually over the last 14 months. These changes have included cuts to citizen roles, financial restrictions on so-called non-mandatory programs of conservation authorities like recreation, and additional costs that have been imposed on the conservation authorities, but without any additional monies from the province. Our CA Watch has been also, by doing this observation, monitoring, has been catching major issues, like a developer threat to the Garner Road marsh, which you heard much about if you've been to any of the earlier ones, and consideration of an offsetting policy by the Hamilton Conservation Authority. And as a result of our intervention, and especially as a result of your actions as viewers and participants, we have had better than expected outcomes. We've had victories in blocking the planned destruction of the Garner Road marsh, and the HCA has rejected the offsetting policy that would have allowed so-called relocation and compensation of wetlands, streams, forests, and other natural features to accommodate developers. And that was as a result of over 300 submitted comments and over 200 people who wrote to the Conservation Authority specifically about the Garner Road marsh. So our CA Watch is continuing every month and we'll briefly let you know about some of what our volunteers have recently observed in a moment. But first, I'm going to go back to Jim Quinn and ask him to introduce our feature interview with Mohawk Seedkeeper TerryLynn Brant.
So here you see a picture of TerryLynn. I'm going to play the video in just a moment. I actually visited with TerryLynn for about 3 hours a couple of weeks before this basically what amounts to a conversation with TerryLynn. You'll see it's a bit choppy because I took out things. I had to trim it down to about 10 minutes or so. It's a little over 10 minutes. But during my first conversation with TerryLynn, she spoke to the issue of how do you resolve this climate change issue. And from her perspective, the way to solve the climate change issue and the biodiversity issue is to heal Mother Earth. So by concentrating on protecting the earth, doing it a better service, and moving more towards a sustainable lifestyle, we can make changes, important changes. So it's going to require some changes in the way we do things. We have to be more sustainable. And by healing the earth will heal the climate, was her main point. So I'll just start her off, and you can listen to her speak about these kinds of issues in a little more detail, because I think she kind of felt like she had already told me the general stuff, and now here's some detail.
Hello, everyone. I'm here at the Earthship with TerryLynn Brant, who's the seed keeper for Six Nations, and TerryLynn is going to talk with us about her thoughts on climate change and other issues. And so I'll just pass this over to TerryLynn and let her take it away.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, or wherever it is in the time of day that you're at. So this is my Earthship. I began building it. Will be its fourth summer coming up soon. We pretty much are done. We just have the aesthetic kind of artsy kind of things to finish up, like in it. And as you can see, Jim sitting here, it's quite warm today. It's probably close to 70, I would say. And it has no heat source at all, other than that sunlight that's coming in the windows. Now, in the dead of winter, you lose the sunlight. Of course, it's going to cool off a bit. But it is a structure that is basically a thermal mass. So there's a whole bunch of tires in the wall and recycled stuff and things like that. And all those things absorb the heat during the day. And then it gives that heat off during the night to help keep it warm. I do have a little tiny wood stove over here because for cooking, it's about, 100 years old. But I need it just for cooking and stuff. So we do the Earthship here is a structure that I built, and it has about 6 features to it. One of them being the fact that it creates its own warmth and its own thermal mass for heating. It has tunnels put into it for cooling itself. It has solar panels on the outside for providing electricity. It gathers its own rain on the roof, brings that rain inside or to an exterior rain catchment or a big cistern. Then that comes into the Earthship itself, and we use it for cooking and cleaning, and then we run it through. Over there you'll see that white wall, that's a planting cell. We run it through there in an underground river, and by the time we end up sending the water eventually to our garden, we end up using that rainwater that we collected about 6 or 7 times. As citizens of people that live in Ontario, we're so used to the government or places like the GRC, the conservation areas, we're so used to them trying to do programs to fix the environment, but we're not doing them ourselves. And the whole point of it is we're trying to teach people to live a little more lightly on Earth so that we can get out of the habit of destroying the climate. So the purpose of our Earthship here today, this space is part of my classroom, right, where we teach seed saving, Haudenosaunee Indigenous agricultural methods, which again are more sustainable, are easier on the earth. And the whole point of climate So the more that we move away from that big egg, the better off we are. Our approach is more from our philosophical worldview. Okay? I can give you a whole big list, do this, do this, do this, and you can come here and you can see these, and that's part of why I created this garden in this space, so that you could come and actually see it being used and being done, and figure out how I built it and what issues I had with it and how you could, to improve upon it in your situation. So that was the whole point. So this is kind of a demonstration model place so people can see these kind of things. And then maybe not take an entire earthship, but you might be able to take that simple rainwater collection system that I created, right? And use that in your own home. And I think that's what we have to figure out. How do we take our structures that we have now, our own homes that we live in the urban centers especially, and how do we start to tweak them to start to improve, right? To stop adding to the problem, to hopefully at least get to a slightly negative, right? So where we can start to improve. My thing with my dad, he always said, if you're not improving the earth, then you've wasted your life. You're useless. He says, because if you're not helping to keep it healthy. But the way we do that garden is important, okay? So we don't use tractors. We don't use rototillers. Like, I garden with literally my pitchfork, my hoe, and a stick, right? The way our people always have. My main crop is not the crop itself, but the seeds that they produce. So I have a lot of rare varieties. Obviously, I have varieties that have been in my family lineage since before European settlers even came here. Now, we have what's called, you all probably are familiar with what's called food forests. We have a Carolinian food forest, right? Which when we go backwards, for Haudenosaunee people, Carolinian bush or Carolinian plants, flora, fauna, everything that's there was our Haudenosaunee. That's our first garden, okay? So the bush is your first garden. Finding a small clearing or a space to put some corn in and maybe some beans was the second garden. Because of biodiversity and the fact that we have so many invasive species that are getting rid of these, we actively work on getting rid of invasives on the property here as part of our project, but then we're reintroducing the Carolinian varieties and species that, for whatever reason, no longer exist in my bush lot. So I'm trying to reinvigorate the Carolinian forest here, and eventually we'll be eating from that. But in my mind, because of the kind of work that I do as a seed keeper, as a seed sanctuary, that bush spot, that Carolinian food forest, so to speak, will eventually become a living seed bank. Anything that's out there in the bush, we want to kind of leave it there, right? We want it to grow. So if you're a forager, then I kind of discourage foraging to the sense, because we're over foraging in a lot of places. Put them in your yard because they are pretty. Some of them have beautiful flowers, and we just don't really realize the beauty of the indigenous species that we have, and the fact that we can eat a lot of them, we can use a lot of them for medicines, and a lot of things like that. So that's really important to us. Part of our society problem that we're getting into, we want it now, right? I want a maple sugar bush now, right? No, that sugar bush takes hundreds of years, right? And if it's a couple hundred years, that the bush itself, the reality is the ecosystem of that bush takes 1,000 years. So when you cut down a field, and the loss of the trees and the loss of everything there, that takes 1,000 years for it to get healthy and get back to what it was. And those are a big part of our problem, that tree loss coverage, not just the trees, but all the layers. I really think working in as a collective is a really important thing, because the more you work together on projects and with things, the more satisfaction, the more compassion you have, the more you get to know your neighborhood, and the more that you really want to work to improve it. And as an older person, the grandfather generation especially, those of us that are retired, it is part of our duty and our responsibility to think about our environment overall for the future, for our great-grandchildren, what it's going to look like. Think about what needs to be improved and changed, find those, and to start to take some of the action. Older people have a tendency, will write letters and will make the appointments where, the younger you are, the more chances are that you're going to just get out there and, shut down a bridge or something like that, but I think we can be very effective by using some of the processes that are available to us. And every time things, okay, they understand that we have hope for the future. So, but we can't give up hope, because as soon as we give up hope, then we might as well just face, wipe the human race right off the face of the earth. So I think that's really important, that we are constantly thinking and looking at the places in our collective neighborhood, cities, towns that need our help, need our support, how we can support them in the best way we can as a group of citizens, and understanding and taking that next step, letting our governments know that we're not happy with this, that we want to see things change. Something here in my community, I get really ticked when there's a part of the community that is, kind of decent for a farm, could be potential farmland, and they want to go put housing there. I said, well, if you go down that road down there, the band, you also own that, and it's all rocky. It's not really good for agriculture. Can you have sense as to what you're allowing? And so that's where having your voice as a people, right? And sometimes you got to get out there and search and say, look, instead of there, here's an alternative. So those are just kind of some of my thoughts. So thank you very much for having me today.
Thanks very much, TerryLynn. It's been nice to visit your Earth ship, and I'll hopefully come back again and visit another time. Lots to learn here. Thanks. Hello.
So thanks, Jim, and thanks, TerryLynn. As I'm sure you're all aware, we are located wherever we're coming into this webinar on stolen land. These are the traditional lands in the Hamilton area of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, and they have been the ones who have taken care of these lands for thousands of years before settlers arrived. And we think that one of the ways to recognize and honor that is to invite Indigenous voices like TerryLynn to share their wisdom with us. And I hope that you found that useful tonight. So I want to go on now to a couple of updates from the Conservation Watch that I mentioned before. The updates we're going to hear are from Sue Carson and Ria Vimula. And I put that over to Sue now, I think, to take that on. I think you've got a video of this. Is that correct?
Just some slides.
Oh, just comment.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jim. You can put the next one up. Okay. As Don explained, for the past year, a small group of us have been tuning in to 5 different Conservation Authority meetings. The information that we have gleaned has reinforced our initial concerns that Mr. Ford's new Conservative Authorities Act is going to be detrimental to the environment. Managing the watersheds is the #1 responsibility of CAs, and their collective data will be invaluable as to how Ontario manages flood control in the future. This chart shows the various levels in flood reporting. In February, 3 of the conservation authorities had to issue flood warnings, which is the bottom level, all right, or the highest risk of flood warnings, to ensure that the public was aware of what was happening. Next slide, Jim. This slide was taken in Halton, showing overland flooding resulting in some road closures. Conservation Halton reported that January and February had higher than normal snow and rain. In recent years, Oakville and Burlington have both had very extreme storms, and many homes have been flooded and some even destroyed. So Conservation Halton is ahead in flood mapping because of these previous disasters. For too many years, municipalities have allowed housing growth in areas that should have been designated floodplains. Developers have been pressing for more building land without concern for safety. Next slide, Jim. The Credit Valley Conservation Area, which is the one that I watch mostly, have this quote on their website. With our partners, we strive to build flood resiliency in communities most vulnerable to flooding in the Credit River watershed. Our work has become more urgent as a result of climate change. And you can see on this photo that it has become very urgent for these people, these homeowners. This is from one of the most serious flooding episodes on the West Credit River. In Brampton, 100 homes and more had to be evacuated for a few days until the water levels had subsided. So it's in their backyard and it's coming to your backyard too. With increasing dangers of flooding because of climate change, the conservation authorities will be responsible for increased monitoring, and the costs of this flooding will have to be met by their budgets. The provincial government provides somewhere less than 5% of their funding, and no increase is being given to meet these new flood dangers. Next slide, Jim. This is flooding from the Cambridge area, coming up in a moment. This one on the Speed River. They had elevated flood risks for a week. They were monitoring for 24 hours, so that's staff who are used. And in March, almost less than a month later, they had to issue another flood warning. Just when climate scientists predicted more extreme rain events, the new regulations under the Conservation Authorities Acts may impact how the authorities are able to effectively protect the natural environment. The last slide, Jim. As we drive around and become more aware, we're going to be seeing more flooded roads, more restrictions where we won't be able to go into parks because of flooding. Many of the storms that we've experienced, next slide, Jim. We've been told that there are 100-year storms, but these storms are happening every 10 years now, or even more frequently. We need a government who acknowledges that there is a climate crisis and who is prepared to act to ensure that properties are not built in vulnerable locations. Having observed the meetings this past year, it seems that the conservation areas have the knowledge to reduce future catastrophes, but only if the provincial government is prepared to listen to the experts and not their developer friends. If learning more about conservation authorities is of interest to you, please get in touch, as we would love to have more people helping us and be able to monitor more conservation area boards like Lake Simcoe and Toronto. I'm going to hand over to Ria now, who's going to tell you about another new development that we've learnt about through the conservation area boards. Thanks.
Next. Hi, everybody. My name is Ria. I hope everybody's having a great day. To preface, a little bit about is that the provincial government is responsible for only 2 to 5% of conservation authorities' budgets, and the rest is through the municipality and through maintenance fees. This means spending and the allocation of resources. The Conservation Authorities Board was created to help and conserve restoration issues in Ontario's watersheds. Recently, the Ford government has been spending and creating openings in some of the Conservation Authority boards for agricultural representatives. This is rather strange, as the provincial government is not supposed to interfere with conservation authorities. These agricultural representatives will have voting rights. Except on budget matters, they are able to give their opinions on construction in protected lands, as well as any other conservation/restoration projects. Yet they are not elected representatives. What makes this issue so alarming is that the fact that pro-construction, pro-industrialization, and pro-fossil fuel government is enabling people of their liking who are politically inclined to vote on matters such as construction and wetlands in their favor. Next slide, please. This shows the lack of transparency and corruption within our government, as not many citizens are aware of this issue. The conservation of our wetlands is extremely important, as draining will release thousands of carbon dioxide emissions and will make the wetlands a carbon source, as well as destroy the habitats of already endangered species. A couple of conservation authority boards, such as Credit Valley, have already introduced agriculture representatives. This is something that is new and developing, so we must act fast. As citizens of Ontario, we must be very careful and monitor our conservation authorities, for example, by attending monthly meetings and voting for a government which represents our values and our issues. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ria and Sue. Those updates, as I say, are happening because we have volunteers who are monitoring these boards and bringing this information to us through this kind of format. In addition to appointing people directly to the Independent Conservation Authority boards, which the province is now doing with these people who are called agricultural representatives, and that's despite the fact that some conservation authorities, many of them actually already have farmers as members of their boards because they are representatives of municipalities that include agriculture and so on. But in addition to these appointments, the new provincial rules that have been imposed by the provincial government are forcing volunteer citizens off the Conservation Authority boards. So at this point, about half of Conservation Authority boards are made up of citizen volunteers, and the other half are made up of municipal councillors. But the new rules require that at least 70% of the representatives of each municipality must be councillors. And that means that if you don't have more than 3 representatives, all of them have to be councillors. And very few municipalities have more than 3 representatives on any particular Conservation Authority board. We have an exception here in Hamilton where the Hamilton Conservation Authority has 10 representatives from the Hamilton City Council, 5 of whom are currently councillors and 5 of whom are citizens. But as this change is imposed next year, at maximum, there will only be 3 citizens on that board. And on the other boards that we're watching, there will be even fewer citizens than there are now and fewer than are going to be represented on the Hamilton board. And in terms of who gets to sit on those boards, these are decisions that are made aside from this provincial appointee that the Ford government has introduced. The decisions on who sits there are decisions of the local municipal council. And it's in 2 parts. Which councillors get on is decided by the councillors among themselves. And then they have usually a committee to take applications for citizen members, and they choose which ones to put on. And as a result, the board composition in the Hamilton Conservation Authority, 10 of the 11 members are selected by Hamilton Council. The other one comes from Puss Lynch, selected by the Puss Lynch Council. So these rules are relevant to also to who gets to chair these boards. And last month, over 250 people wrote to the Hamilton Conservation Authority encouraging that board to replace its current chair. That got a huge amount of publicity, a lot of public debate, including a response from the chair himself and a number of other people who wrote opinion pieces in the newspaper. And when the election took place in the beginning of February, 3 of the board members boycotted the meeting rather than participating in acclaiming the current chair to another year of office as the chair of the Hamilton Conservation Authority. But he does remain in that position and will so until after the municipal elections this fall. So I want to go now to a video presentation that Nancy Hurst has put together on additional threats to wetlands, streams, and forests that are taking form near the Garner Road marsh and on other farmland and green areas, especially in the Airport Employment Growth District. So Jim, you're going to throw this up here.
Hi folks, I'm Nancy from Save Our Streams Hamilton. I'm also one of the organizers of the Stop Sprawl campaign, and I, along with many others, was delighted when Hamilton City Council voted last November to not expand our urban boundary. 3,300 acres of prime woodland, along with its wetlands, headwaters, wildlife habitat, hedgerows, and forest communities in the potential expansion areas, were saved from being paved for sprawling residential suburbs. It was a great outcome, but what you might not know is that what was saved is only a part of Hamilton's farmland, because over 1,300 acres had already been swept into the urban fold in 2015. But it wasn't for residential development, it was for industrial sprawl, and it's shown here in purple. Just for a reference, the red square outlines the property H is where the Garner Marsh is located. prime food land here was rezoned from agricultural to what's called employment land in 2015. That means that no houses will be built, but something worse, warehouses, and lots of them. In the early 2000s, this area was labeled the Aerotropolis, and there was a lot of opposition to it. Folks cited loss of farmland and the massive cost of servicing over 1,000 acres of greenfields as reasons to pause. But nevertheless, despite a massive pushback and an appeal to the OMB, the plan went ahead and the land was rezoned. Given its unpopularity, it was then rebranded as the Airport Employment Growth District, or AEGD. Since then, the properties in the airport lands have changed hands many times as speculators bought, sold, and flipped. Fortunes were made, as always happens when urban boundaries expand. And it's taken many years for development to begin, but it has, starting with the Amazon warehouse near the airport. And now the floodgates are open and the applications to throw up more warehousing are flying in thick and fast. All of this is fueled by e-commerce. We've gone from walkable communities with local shops, to malls, to big box stores, and now to online purchasing with goods delivered tomorrow with the click of a button today. Perhaps a move back towards a more sustainable model of shops in walkable neighborhoods would be the answer. But for now, e-commerce rules, and we are tracking 5 such development applications at the moment in the airport lands. The warehouse complex plan for the Garner Marsh is just one of them. So in response to this imminent threat to the headwaters, not only of Hamilton, but of 4 conservation authorities whose headwaters are located here, we formed a grassroots group, which we've called Save Our Streams Hamilton. Our aim is to shine a light on the hundreds of acres of irreplaceable natural heritage, from headwaters to foodland to habitat on the Hamilton Mountain, that are now in the crosshairs of development. As I mentioned before, this land was rezoned as employment land in 2015, and 4 years later, in March of 2019, Hamilton declared a climate emergency and then set about doing very little about it. Now we're up against a wall. We've learned so much since then about the climate emergency, about the real need for local food systems, about biodiversity loss, and about the risks of flooding associated with paving over nature. Hamilton has goals, bylaws, and secondary plans in place to help us avoid worsening the climate change picture and to protect nature. But are those goals and visions being followed or ignored? 5 development applications amounts to thousands of pages of material to look over. So these are just a tiny fraction of the species, habitats, and natural features that are found in the AEGD that I pulled from the documents. Many of them are species of special concern, are threatened, or endangered. And what is often listed on development applications as, quote, vacant land is anything but. These farmlands, forests, and wetlands are alive and teeming with biodiversity. So not only do they produce food for us, they're also home to hundreds and hundreds of species. So whether you're a bird lover, a tree hugger, or a wetland wanderer, it's all here and it all needs saving. Secondary plans are a sort of roadmap for how an area within the city is to be developed. The AEGD has its own secondary plan, and its purpose is to act as a guide to the sort of development that we expect to see here. These are words and phrases I pulled from the secondary plan for the AEGD. The area is envisioned to be an eco-park that blends in with nature, respects the natural features, and affords it protection. It commits to making efficient use of the land by building industrial buildings more densely, thus protecting mature trees, source water, streams, and trails. It speaks of reducing emissions, adding green roofs and solar panels, minimizing surface parking, and building active transportation networks. But let's not kid ourselves. This is nothing more than a kindergarten wish list for Santa Claus, because that's not how warehousing is built. Because when this biodiversity hotspot, with a wetland, hedgerows, small forests, and a headwater tributary of the Ancaster Creek, which you can see the outline of gently curving across the farm field, turns into this, you can be sure that every single inch of green space that is owned by the corporation who bought it will be obliterated and paved. And any part on this picture that you see that's white is what they don't own. On this property alone, 1,087 trees, shown in red, not even including the woodland to the bottom of the slide, will meet the chainsaw to clear the way for industrial sprawl, and that includes endangered butternuts. And of the 5 development applications we're tracking, of the literally dozens and dozens that could be coming, that amounts to 5,000 trees being removed during a climate emergency, and when Hamilton is putting the finishing touches on its urban forestry preservation plan. So that flies in the face of pretty much everything. This type of development application is what's planned for the AEGD, but it's not what was envisioned. There's no respect for nature, nothing eco about this, no preservation of wetlands, especially if we are now at the OLT trying to save a locally significant one from being paved. So instead of the rosy wish list of the AEGD secondary plan, what we have is a developing hellscape of massive complexes, wetlands that turn into stormwater management ponds, thousands of truck and car parking spaces and loading spaces and loading bays, their impervious surfaces, and tributaries realigned to flow in straight lines between the towering walls of Building 1 and Building 2. And you can see it here. This is a tributary of the 20-mile creek watershed. They've realigned it to go between these two buildings, but isn't it nice that they've made it meander for a more natural experience? And this is a provincially significant wetland, which is protected and will be afforded the minimum buffer allowed by law, but still it will be surrounded on 3 sides by warehouse complexes. So instead of the utopian vision of an eco-park, what we're getting is the status quo: destruction, contamination, pollution, deforestation. It's an abomination. Oh, and who is paying for all these services that need to be put in place to support this development? Just as we discovered during the Stop Sprawl movement, sprawl costs Hamilton taxpayers. This is a cost estimate from 2010. The proponents who were pushing to have the airport employment growth district stopped poured over thousands of paper documents and added it all up to $500 million. So do you think that perhaps 12 years later, that the price tag has probably gone up? If it was $500 million in 2010 to service this land, I'd be very curious to know what it costs now. And it's probably all indicated in the capital budget. If anybody in the audience is a forensic accountant and wants to contact us, we'd be happy to go through it and find out how much this will cost us in today's dollars. So when Hamilton declared a climate emergency, goals to address it were created. One was ensure a climate change lens is applied to all planning initiatives to encourage the use of best climate change mitigation and adaptation practices. Another one was protect and restore the natural environment by increasing our carbon sinks and local food production through the preservation and enhancement of the natural environment, including local farmland. And finally, improve Hamilton's climate resiliency by decreasing our vulnerability to extreme weather and minimizing for future damages. Well, there's nothing that's going to cause damage more than an entirely impervious Hamilton mountain. That means flooding downstream, no questions asked. So the question is, in choosing to demolish our headwaters and pave over our natural lands by putting industry here in this location, is Hamilton following its own rules and visions and recommendations? Is there somewhere more appropriate for this sort of land use? We believe there is, and it's the Portlands. The Bayfront Industrial Area was created for this type of industry. In the past, this area was a significant employment area, supporting tens of thousands of jobs. But that number has plummeted, and much of the space is now deserted and awaiting revival. Both Nikola Tesla Boulevard and Burlington Street, with their elevated overpasses, were designed to accommodate the constant flow of heavy truck traffic. The area is already serviced, and there's a significant multimodal transportation hub right here with direct access to the marine, with the port being here, to rail, and to connections to 3 different highways. Additionally, it's a mere 20 minutes to the Hamilton Airport. So before a single other inch of our headwaters are destroyed, we are demanding that warehouses be put where they belong. We're demanding wetlands, not warehouses, on the AEGD land. Thank you so much for listening and for your passion for saving our natural heritage in Hamilton. Please do join us on Thursday, April 7th for our first ever online rally to save the Garner Marsh. This will be a lighthearted hour of speakers and entertainers, and we're going to round off with a fundraiser where every donation made will be eligible for a tax receipt, thanks to our partnership with the Small Change Fund. We hope to raise a lot of money that night to offset the costs of our legal battle to save the Garner Marsh at the Ontario Land Tribunal. And this is a precedent-setting case because it's the first time a developer has taken the Hamilton Conservation Authority and appealed their decision and their right to deny their permit application to demolish a marsh. So we hope that denying that will set a precedent in our favor. So please visit our website for more details and join our newsletter while you're there so that we can email you the registration link and keep you up to date. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for all that information so clearly and thoroughly presented in covering so much territory. I want to take you back in the wake of that presentation to the situation with the Garner Road Marsh, which many of you have been involved in and trying to protect. So as you know, it has gone to an Ontario Land Tribunal hearing. And in February, there was a case management conference to begin that process and try to determine how it would proceed. One of the things that came out of that was that the hearings on this issue will not take place until 2023 and perhaps later than that, but that's the expectation. What particularly positively came out of the case management hearing in early February was an addition of a new party to the hearings. Parties are the ones who have the most clout in these things. They have all the rights to participate, to be represented by lawyers and so on. And environmental defense, the provincial environmental leader has stepped up and become a party to this hearing. And that not only means that there is a voice there for the marsh in the hearings, but if there's any attempt to have some kind of a settlement, a closed door, backdoor deal, it can only occur if environmental defense agrees. So now the marsh itself has a voice sitting at the table to make sure that that doesn't happen and that we end up in a situation where the Ontario Land Tribunal, if it's going to rule against us, it has to do that in an open forum, in an open way. That environmental defense role doesn't come without cost. And it appears that the developers may be trying to make this hearing as long as possible in order to increase the costs to groups like environmental defense. So the rally on April 7th that Nancy spoke of is a fundraiser as part of that webinar on April 7th, starting at 7 p.m. We need those funds to help environmental defense with its legal defense of this marshland, to help it hire environmental experts to bolster its case and to help handle its legal costs. So there are costs that are now on our radar, and we need to make sure that they get covered. So please mark April 7th on your calendar. Please attend and invite your friends.
What day do you?
It's a Thursday night. So now we want to share a stunning video that has been prepared by Craig Cassar with input from many of our volunteers. And it is going to tell us about some of the things the Ford government has done to Ontario's natural features and its role in addressing climate change. We expect many of you will want to share this widely, and it will be part of our follow-up package email to everyone attending tonight's webinar. So without further, here's Ford's Follies. Thanks, Craig.
Immediately upon taking office, he eliminated the independent environmental commissioner, Dr. Diane Sachs.
He canceled the Cap and Trade Climate Action Program at a cost of $3 billion a year.
At a cost of $230 million, he ripped up 758 renewable energy contracts, including solar rooftops on schools, libraries, and municipal buildings.
He proposed opening the Greenbelt to development.
He spent $2.8 billion to buy 3 gas plants and plans to increase greenhouse gas emissions by 40%.
To increase the amount of driving and generate more greenhouse gas emissions to wreck our climate, the Conservative government has eliminated the annual license plate fees at a cost of $1 billion.
He has revived Zombie Highways 413 and the Bradford Bypass, ignoring all negative environmental assessments.
He made pay-to-slay changes to the Endangered Species Act. So instead of protecting endangered species, you can just pay the government for permission to destroy them.
Mr. Ford cancelled the electric vehicle rebate. He said he wasn't giving money to millionaires.
He made major changes to weaken the Environmental Assessment Act for his developer buddies.
He tried to shut down the youth-led climate lawsuit.
He sued the federal government to block carbon pricing and lost at a cost of $30 million.
He rewrote planning rules to favor developers and increase urban sprawl. And he pushed for boundary expansions, including Hamilton, all across the GTA.
He repealed the Toxics Reduction Act and reversed progress on air pollution.
He cut flood management funding to conservation authorities. Mr. Ford has actually ripped out some of the working charging stations.
He has cut 70% of the funding for Anishinaabe and Ontario Fisheries Resource Centre.
Ford slashed funding to the Canadian Environmental Law Association by 30%. This organization defends citizens and helps them in enforcing environmental laws, something that the Ford government apparently doesn't want to happen.
The Ford government eliminated funding to the Ontario Biodiversity Council, a group of stakeholders who report to us, the public.
He canceled the 50 million trees planting program.
Doug Ford slashed Toronto City Council from 47 seats to 25 seats right in the middle of their municipal elections.
The Ford government has attacked conservation authorities in multiple ways in order to reduce their authority and transfer it to the provincial cabinet and reduce the protection of our environment and our waterways and wetlands.
He has retroactively changed the provincial policy statement, allowing MZOs to violate it.
The Ford government has issued over 50 ministerial zoning orders, including on wetlands and environmentally significant lands.
He reduced funding to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, including funds for emergency forest firefighting.
He eliminated the position of Ontario's chief scientist.
He gutted the Environmental Bill of Rights and suspended the public right to comment on and appeal significant changes.
Mom, how much more are we going to let Doug Ford do?
You're muted, Don.
Put myself back. Thank you very much, Craig. Great work on that, and all the volunteers who participated with their voices and identifying the things which the government has done over the last 4 years. You will get a link to that in the follow-up to our webinar tonight, and I hope that you can share it far and wide. Hamilton 350 Committee has established last month an election subgroup. It led the March 12th rally at City Hall for a just transition, and its next meeting is next Tuesday. No, 2 Tuesdays away, April the 5th at 7 p.m. And we'll make sure you have a link to the that meeting as well. Everyone is invited. So one more thing here that we want to alert you to before we get to the end of this webinar. There's a rally taking place this week on Friday. It was a rally set up by the McMaster Students Association. They've called for a boycott of classes, a walkout, starting at noon on Friday. The gathering will be in the central green area of McMaster University in front of the Burke Science Building, the main center of the campus. It's also part of the Fridays for Future rally, and it is now has an extra reason, and that reason we may have a picture of here. The university has unveiled a plan to build gas plants to generate electricity for the university. This plan is just been unveiled. It's going to be going through the planning process at the city, but the university is indicating they expect to start construction in May, this facility, they acknowledge, will increase the greenhouse gas emissions coming from the university. 95% of the emissions that they have acknowledged coming from the university are coming from gas, from fossil gas, also called natural gas. Not sure why it's called natural. It is a project that will make that worse as an attempt to generate electricity and avoid the prices of electricity from the provincial government. It's worth noting that the provincial electricity coming into our homes and everybody else's, including McMaster, is over 80% produced without fossil fuels, and much of the time it's over 90%. But all the electricity that will be generated by this new facility at McMaster will be 100% generated by fossil fuels, fossil gas. And in Ontario, over 80% of our gas is frack gas. So the implications are severe, not just in terms of emissions, but for a lot of other reasons as well, as you're likely aware. So that is taking place on Friday afternoon, noon, on the central campus. Everybody is welcome to attend. You don't have to be young. You don't have to be a student. You just have to support action on climate change. And the initial reason for the students calling this walkout is to continue to press their Board of Governors to divest from fossil fuels. So about $20 million of McMaster's monies are now invested in fossil fuels. This is something that is being pressed for the last decade and more. Over, I think the numbers are over $40 trillion now has been divested, but McMaster hasn't caught up with that yet. So lots to keep in mind and hopefully to participate in. And I think we got one more slide there that will give us some, some questions. So we're heading, as we mentioned in passing, that we're heading into a provincial election. It's scheduled for, I believe, June 3rd or June 2nd. Presumably you may encounter some candidates for that election, and you may have some concerns about some of the things that have been raised here tonight or elsewhere. So we're suggesting some questions that you might want to take note of. Will you reverse the changes made to the Conservation Authorities Act and ensure the full ability of the conservation authorities to stop environmentally destructive proposals? What will you do to address the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis? Will you ensure that Ontario's electricity supply is free of fossil fuels instead of being an expansion of gas plants, as was mentioned earlier? And will you stop the proposed Highway 413 and Bradford bypass and oppose any more major new highways? And I'm sure you may have other questions. We will forward these 4 questions to you in the follow-up to this webinar tonight. And one last slide, which I think is just reminders. Yes. So Friday, the rally at McMaster at noon. Tuesday, on April 5th, the elections meeting, election subgroup meeting. Thursday, the 7th, the Save Garner Marsh rally and fundraiser. And May the 9th is when the next Ontario Land Tribunal conference is scheduled. Case management conference is scheduled on the Garner Marsh. And you can go to the Save Our Streams website and find out how to become a participant, which gives you the right to send them a written commentary on the situation that they're debating within the hearings, your views on saving the marsh and so on. So all of that on our list, and I think that covers us.
There's one more little thing. We're going to open the discussion for questions and answers. If you'd like to raise your hand, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see reactions, and if you click on that, you'll see the possibility of raising your hand. That way, I think Don's going to moderate this, and he'll know the order in which people wanted to speak. In the background, we have Stephanie, who's been looking at the chat, and she may come on with some questions that she's pulled from the chat. I wanted to just correct one small thing, and that is that it wasn't the student union or the McMaster students. It was actually McMaster Divest, or Mac Divest, that has called this walkout and rally coming up on Friday. So I'm going to pass it over to Dawn and or Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Jim, and thanks so much to everyone who came out. We had a lot of really awesome comments in the chat and some really great sources shared in there as well. So maybe we can save that chat and include some of those sources in our follow-up document that's going to be sent out. Generally, we try to limit the Q&A to 3 questions just for the sake of respecting anyone who does have to head out at the end of the webinar, which is technically now. But we do an open discussion afterwards, as Jim has mentioned, that Dawn is going to facilitate. We do have one question right now, as you can probably see with Cynthia's hands up, and it's a good one. And she would like to ask it herself. So Cynthia, you go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm wondering who it was who approached the provincial government to request the funding for this project. And I'm shocked that it's ready to go in May, because this must have been requested quite some time ago.
Let me try to respond to that, Cynthia. It doesn't appear that there is actually money being provided by the provincial government to McMaster to do this. The scheme is more complicated. The province sells electricity to McMaster and everybody else coming through the grid, and when peak periods occur, the price of that electricity goes up. So McMaster has been advised by its consultants that if it generates its own electricity during peak periods, and initially that's what they say they're only going to do, although once you've got a gas-fired power plant sitting on your campus, you can fire it up anytime and even start selling that electricity to somebody else. But at this point, they say 60 to 100 hours a year is their expectation for using this gas-fired power plant in order to avoid the higher prices for electricity during peak periods. This is something which the provincial government seems to be very much pushing for, and it's a part of the way their billing system goes, that large users like the university can do this, can lower their costs by establishing their own power sources. It doesn't appear that the university has considered solar panels or wind turbines or some other means of generating electricity. It also doesn't seem to be paying attention to the fact that all of the electricity they generate through a gas-fired power plant on campus is going to be done with fossil fuels, where most of the electricity coming from the province is not coming that way. It's mostly from nuclear facilities or hydropower or wind turbines and some small amounts of solar panels.
Thank you, Don.
So beautiful. That's actually what we have. I have one specifically very quickly for Craig, because I believe that video that I did about the fallacies of Ford is already on our YouTube channel, but I just want to make sure I'm correct about that. Am I right about that, Craig?
Not on the Hamilton 350 channel yet, but we can put it up there.
Okay, is it on Save Our Streams?
Nancy, is it there? I'm not sure.
No, it isn't, but it will be. I can stick that on there, no problem.
Okay, great. So just keep an eye out, guys, on our Save the Streams page. I shouldn't say our because that's not me, but Nancy and Craig and others save the streams, and also it will be up on Hamilton 350's YouTube channel. So if you want to share that, that'd be great, because I think that's a really profound. I'm gonna watch my words. Kick butt video that everyone should share. So that's actually all the questions we had from the chat. The presentations were so informative. I think everyone's pretty filled in on that. But we can open to an open discussion if anyone has any outstanding questions that are just coming to them now, or they'd like to ask any questions to our panelists or Dawn or Jim or anything like that. Got a hand up there, Gord?
Yes, two hot issues that need to be added to the list, I think, of election issues for the campaign are the Ontario Land Tribunal itself, which of course is very developer friendly. Our Burlington columnist Joan Little in The Spectator feels that should be one of the leading issues for the campaign, because a single person on a tribunal has enormous power and can overrule some very good decisions by municipal councils. They seem to have unfettered authority on the tribunal, and it's not the way the rules are set up. They really don't allow too much public input at all. The big issue, of course, is the need to introduce much stronger regulation to the mineral extraction industry. The applications for mining are taking place in a number of very controversial municipalities that are facing very controversial decisions by the mining interests. And there's a very strong campaign underway to demand, I think, a moratorium until the industry has been reviewed with the need to strengthening the regulations as regards aggregate mining. So signed the dam petition, it's called. Sandy Shaw has been a real leader on this issue. And those two issues, the OLT and aggregate extraction, are pretty hot.
Thanks very much, Gord. And I expect that we could open up the floor and find more because the list that we were able to put together was pretty quick. And it just seems like it just continues to grow. The mining issue, not only the gravel mining, which Wellington Water Watchers is, and the Gravel Mining Coalition is leading a campaign and has the petition. But in addition, what we're seeing happening in Northern Ontario with the so-called Ring of Fire, which is directly assaulting Indigenous nations and the lands and waters that they have protected for millennia, under the claim that this is going to produce green energy by tearing out minerals and destroying the landscape to find stuff that you can put into a battery maybe. But I'm sure there's others out there.